Everybody, welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast. This being our early afternoon episode for the day. Welcome. I got Jacob with me. We dragged him out of his secret hiding place to come do a podcast.
Yeah.
So, what's going on? Who do we got watching today? We got a few of you. I see the numbers coming in. Jacob, what are you up to today? Anything cool?
Trying to stay warm, actually, not cool. It's freezing.
It is quite cool outside. Yep. And what we'll give you a little behind the scenes look of the podcast. What many of you may not know is that I have to turn off my furnace every time we do an episode like this, because it kicks on and you can absolutely hear it in the recording. So I have to try to plan ahead and run the furnace and get things in the house nice and toasty, and then I shut it off, and then we do the podcast, and then half the time I forget to turn it back on, and then my wife screams at me about getting cold.
Well, it would be cold. I think she's justified.
Absolutely.
I used to do that all the time, though. When we had our video studio in my basement, I'd flip the furnace off to film, and the next morning walk down, in the morning into the downstairs and be like, whoa, definitely forgot to turn the furnace back on.
Hello, Project 704 Media from Charlotte. Let's see, Brett and Bobby, thanks for joining, guys. Well, I say we get rolling with this show, huh? What do you say?
Ready to roll.
All right, let's do it. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 479. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, joined today by co-host, co-founder, co-awesome dude, Jacob Paulsen.
Thanks, Riley.
Got to make you sound cooler than you actually are.
That was good. You delivered for sure.
Well, everybody, welcome to another episode. Today's topic, we're actually talking about this. This is our standard once a month industry news and gear reviews episode. And so we'll share some of the latest industry news from around the firearms and training and gun industry. And then Jacob and I have a couple of products that we'll share with you and give you our thoughts and our reviews on them. So, looking forward to hearing what Jacob's going to cover with us for today. I haven't even really looked at it. Oh, okay. That'll be interesting. All right. And you don't even know what I'm doing on mine because I haven't put it in the outline yet.
That's right. No idea.
Guys, stay tuned. I think you'll appreciate the products we cover today. Some good stuff to offer for y'all. Today's podcast is sponsored and brought to you by the 2021 Guardian Conference. This is our first annual training conference that we are organizing at concealedcarry.com. It's presented by CCW Safe, and we're so proud to have them on as a presenting sponsor of the event. And also, this is closely related to our membership program, Guardian Nation, because Guardian Nation members, we have a bunch of you guys already signed up and planning on attending. And Guardian Nation members are, you guys, that's what this is that's what this is all about. Is being members gives you special access to deals and training and all that. So you guys are saving big on the tuition for the 2021 Guardian Conference. Where can you learn more about the Guardian Conference? Well, guardianconference.com. You can see our lineup of instructors. You can see some travel and accommodation related information, what kind of gear and stuff you want to bring. Also want to point out that we have some instructions up on the site now to how to ship ammunition to us, so we can have that ready for you on site for the first day of training. The idea being that many of you are going to want to bring at least 800 rounds and maybe even a little bit more. So you probably aren't going to be able to to fly with that if you're traveling in by air, or if you just don't feel like driving it across country yourself, ship your ammo to us. We'll keep it safe. We'll take care of it and make sure everything is delivered on time at the start of the event. Also want to point out, we've already got a bunch of other great instructors. We've talked about them in the past. Larry Vickers being probably the most well-known instructor we have on our list. I do actually want to just quickly announce, Jacob, that for those of you that may not have seen it yet, but recently Larry Vickers announced on social media that he's been diagnosed with a form of lymphoma. He is still, as of this time, planning on teaching at our event. All right. The event's about 7 months away, and he anticipates treatment to last about 6 months or so. And so his hope and plan and intent is to still be a part of the Guardian Conference. So we're excited for that, and we wish him the absolute best. Our thoughts and prayers are with Larry during this time as he has this little bump in the road in his life and gets treatment for this cancer. I just was talking with him this morning and confirming some things via email, and he was saying that, yep, we're good to go as of right now, as long as things stay the course. That he feels like he'll be ready for the Guardian Conference. So super excited about that. Again, we have other great instructors: Spencer Keepers, Chuck Haggard, Matt Little, Brian Eastridge, Steve Moses, Sam Middlebrook, Brian McLaughlin, Haney McMood, Andrew Branca, myself, and probably a few others, but also we just brought on board Todd Fossey, who's going to be providing some awesome hand-to-hand and combatives related training for the event as well. So super excited for this all-star cast and team of top instructors. So guys, go get signed up at guardianconference.com. Still early bird pricing right now, and no guarantee as to how long that will remain in place. So take advantage of early bird pricing now. Get signed up. I know some of you may have some concerns about ammo. You got 7 months to find some. All right. And our hope and our goal is to keep ammunition counts at a reasonable level. 800 rounds should be able to do it. If you can send 1,000 rounds, it might not be a bad idea. All right. Also, there'll be some training opportunities where ammunition is not needed as well. There'll be some seminar type courses. There'll be some medical courses. Todd Fossey, again, doing some hand-to-hand and combatives type training. So there, even if you're concerned, you can only come up with 500 rounds. Well, come and shoot your 500 rounds and then fit in the remainder of your time, taking advantage of some fantastic non-live fire training.
You're going to want to be there. I can't imagine a higher ROI. I mean, I get that we're all busy and, a lot of us are broke and ammo is expensive, but I got to presume, if you're listening to this, that you don't plan on not taking any classes or training in the entire year of 2021. You say, oh, ammo's expensive, I'm just not going to learn anything this year. And so presuming that you do plan to do something this year, you still want to learn and grow as in terms of your mindset, your tactics, and your shooting skills, then I got to presume you're going to do something. And I cannot imagine, because I'm involved in the planning, that you could possibly find a better ROI than this event. It's going to be the best thing you could do with your money. And the sooner you enroll, of course, the less it'll cost. And so the higher the ROI will be. But yeah, just go do it. Just go sign up. Guardianconference.com. Anyone can sign up. Any skill level is acceptable. If you know how to take a gun out of a box, put ammo in it, press the trigger a few times, remove the ammo from it, and put the gun back in the box, then you have a sufficient
and be safe while doing it.
Yeah, be safe while doing it, right? Then you have a sufficient degree of knowledge to attend this event. And if you are significantly more advanced than that, I assure you there will be a track of courses available for you that will meet your needs.
Yep. Absolutely. Awesome, guys. We hope to see you at the Guardian Conference. Also, today's episode brought to you by the Type 3 Malfunction Round. This is a nifty little training device intended to help you practice double feed malfunction clearing in live fire, because it is one of the few things I've seen that actually allows you to reliably set up and experience double feed malfunctions in live fire. I've tried a few different things, and there is at least one other product that also accomplishes this ability of setting up double feed malfunctions in live fire, but I actually prefer this one because this one also allows you to clear double feed malfunctions. If you're the type that likes to remove the magazine, clear the malfunction, and reinsert the same magazine into the gun, this is one where you can actually train, like the way you clear the malfunction happens and works exactly the same way that you would expect a real live double feed to occur. So super awesome training device. We sell them on our website, concealedcarry.com. Price is very reasonable for a package of 5 of them, and they'll last you a good while. All right. If you're an instructor, these are a great tool to have. If you do any time at all in your courses teaching double feeds and malfunction clearing, or just as a private individual that just wants to get good practice on double feeds, historically, or I guess traditionally, we set this up in dry fire, right? Where we set up a double feed and we practice clearing that. And dry fire is still a perfect place to learn how to properly and safely clear a double feed and to get good repetitions with it. But the Type 3 malfunction round allows you to do it in live fire and to validate the practice and the training and the time you're putting in your dry fire practice. So guys, check out the Type 3 malfunction round by going to concealedcarry.com/T3MR. That stands for the Type 3 malfunction round. concealedcarry.com/T3MR. So today's episode, as I mentioned, is our news and gear reviews episode. So we are going to get into our first story now. This first one's kind of interesting because it's actually an op-ed piece from the Las Vegas Sun, and it's written by an author by the name of Brian Sexton. He describes himself, at least at one time, as a gun nut. The whole point of his article is to talk about and he calls it the dangerous evolution of the gun nut. He basically starts off by explaining how in his younger years, he would have been described as a gun nut. And a gun nut back then, we're talking probably 30, 40 years ago, a gun nut back then in his mind was somebody that just happened to own a number of guns. And those guns typically ranged from lever action Winchester rifles to shotguns and some revolvers, maybe some other handguns or rifles. But his argument in this op-ed is that the definition of gun nut has changed quite a bit. It's changed from where gun owners spent their time talking about the smooth, sleek lines of wood stocks and fine checkering and that sort of thing, which, by the way, I want to be clear, I appreciate that stuff. All right. I love beautiful guns, and I have a few in my collection that I would describe as being just for almost, basically for looks. They're safe queens, so to speak, right? But he says that in today's world, gun nut has turned into someone that is constantly preaching Molin Labe and come and take them, slogans all over their bags, their gear, their cars. They're proponents of and owners of AR-15's and plastic semi-automatic pistols, and and the focus is more on Second Amendment rights, right? As far as like it being an absolute right, an absolute fundamental right. Self-defense and tactical training is more the thing. So it's kind of an interesting article because, and I say interesting because I don't agree with it. Okay. I mean, he may be right to some degree in that the definition of certain things has changed. That's absolutely true. The culture has changed. That's certainly true. 1960s, 1970s, even 1980s gun culture was very different, and it was much more hunting focused and recreational focused than it is today. And that's for a whole host and variety of reasons, many of which I think are absolutely valid reasons. Jacob, I've been going back through First Freedom, the book by David Harsanyi, which you actually recommended and bought and gifted to company employees that year for Christmas as a Christmas gift. I read it, and I'm going through it again because I was like, it came up in a conversation in the last week, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to read that book again. It's a good book. And his description of how we ended up to where we are is pretty, I think, on point, and provides some context to this Brian Sexton fellow writing this op-ed, who seems a little bit of this guy seems to be a little bit confused, right? With, this is where we were, this is where we are now. How do we get there? In David's book, First Freedom, David Harsanyi covers and talks about how threat to the Second Amendment was not on people's minds really so much up through the 60s, 70s. Well, it kind of started in the 60s and the 70s a little bit, but even up through the 80s didn't really start taking off. And then the passing of the assault weapons ban and the Brady Bill in the 90s, and that sort of began this ushering in of a new focus amongst gun owners and gun lovers and proponents of the Second Amendment. People were actually realizing that, wait a minute, they really are coming after our guns, right? Why was that not as much a concern back when the NFA was passed or the Gun Control Act was passed? Because honestly, a lot of gun owners, even then, were on board with those laws being passed. And they saw them as like, yep, that makes sense. Yep, that's what we're gonna do. They didn't see it as where the intent behind those pushing those laws was to try to take guns and really further restrict rights. It's really a more modern thing in the last 20 or 30 years that certain individuals and politicians have made it very clear, and the current presidential administration is making it further clear that they really do want to take away guns. Your thoughts?
Yeah, all that sounds true. So I think that this op-ed piece is interesting. For one, we're biased. Like, we are definitely the wrong people to ask, right? Like, we are concealedcarry.com. My
EDC 365, as it says on my shirt.
I mean, since day one, I've made no I've not hidden the fact that I am not a gun guy. Like, I don't know history of guns. I don't own old guns. I can't sit here and talk to you about the whatever that conquered the West. Like, I really don't care. I don't hunt. I mean, I'm not against hunting, but I don't hunt. My entire world of firearms revolves around self-defense. It always has. I won't say it always will, but it currently does. That's my experience around firearms. It's the only context around which I discuss firearms, and the only context around which I pretend to have any degree of expertise. So first, I just to acknowledge, like, I'm super biased because, yes, I certainly is my perspective that firearms are first and foremost before everything else, they are a defensive tool. Before they are a tool for acquiring food, before they are a tool for enjoyment and recreation, before they are a tool for financial asset acquisition, before they are a tool for anything else, to me, they are a tool for defensive purposes. And I recognize that's not true for everybody. There are people out there who own firearms purely for collective sake. They don't shoot them. They hardly even know how to operate them. It's just a cool thing to collect and to trade and to own. There are people out there who are only hunters. They just hunt. That's all they do. They love hunting, and that's fine too. So, like, I certainly accept that there's different, groups or reasons to own firearms. It's just not. It's all outside of my context. In my world, the firearm is solely a defensive asset. Which is why I only own one shotgun. And the argument could be made that a good defensive shooter like me should own a bunch of shotguns, but I don't. I only own one. I don't own 5 hunting rifles. I own 2. And they never have shot an animal before. So I'm just not that guy. So I think, that said, with all that disclaimer aside, the industry has changed. You look at industry trade shows like SHOT Show, where I've only been going to SHOT Show for a limited time, relatively, right? Like 5 or 6 years or something. I don't even know. But even in the 5 to 6 years that I've been going to SHOT Show, I've seen a significant change. And I think anyone would agree with this. You look at the products that are being released by the major players. You look at the new companies that are coming into the marketplace in the firearm industry, and there clearly is a shift toward defensive tools, the firearm as a defensive product, and away from what was previously extremely dominated by law enforcement and military, now to an industry where the civilian marketplace is very significant. And if you're ignoring it, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. And when we're talking about the more defensive related tools, right?
Mhm.
So I think like body armor, 20 years ago, do you think there was a civilian market for body armor? I doubt it. I doubt there was much at all, but today there is. Today there's companies who focus solely on selling body armor to non-LEO military consumers. So yes, the industry has definitely shifted. All that is true. And it is the political statement of firearm ownership now relevant where it never was before? Absolutely. And I think, Riley, you summed that up well enough. I don't need to rehash it. It's just times have changed. No one was concerned about their gun rights being restricted in 1950. Yeah, we don't have that many federal gun laws. There's like 3 or something. 1934, the NFA, no one saw that as restricting gun rights. 1968 Gun Control Act, no one was concerned about that. 1986 Firearm Owner Protection Act, the words themselves kind of speak to the fact that no one thought that was going to restrict their rights. But the Brady bill and now the more recent conversations, when you have politicians saying, I want Australian style gun control, I want every firearm registered, licensed, serialized, and taxed.
And licenses to buy ammo and so on and so forth.
That changes the conversation. So now, does gun ownership become a political statement? I suppose to many people it does. But I have to ask, is any of that bad? I mean, that's the challenge with this op-ed is he paints it as a negative picture, that the gun nut of today has gone from being the hunter or the enthusiast to being someone who's concerned about having to defend themselves. And is that true? I suppose maybe at least to some degree, it's definitely true. But is that bad? I don't see it as bad. I don't see any issue with that at all. I don't see any concern with people wanting to defend themselves at all. I mean, the statistics would suggest that the more that becomes the focus of our industry, the more people are successful in defending themselves against violent attacks. Is there any doubt whatsoever that violent crime exists and that it's there and it's prevalent? No, that's definitely happening. So I just don't see any negative connotation to that at all. I don't fully disagree with the premise. I just disagree that it's a problem.
Yeah, and that is the argument he's trying to make, is that he sees the gun nuts of today in his mind are quite extreme, and he feels like that actually in itself poses a danger to gun rights, because the other side will try to paint us as dangerous people, and therefore there's justification to restrict gun rights. Here's why I wanted to talk about this today, and we need to move on obviously to other things, but why I wanted to talk about this was because it's important, I think, for us to recognize that across the spectrum of freedom-loving, gun-owning, Second Amendment believing Americans, it's a wide spectrum of people. You have people all the way from the far right to center and even a little bit into the left, right? Plenty of Democrats, including those that we know that follow this podcast, that own guns and have concealed carry permits and believe in the Second Amendment just like we do, right? And so I know that for some people that's hard to fathom. Well, how can that be that we view certain things as being incompatible, but that's not the case at all. And I would just point out, and this is what I would want to tell this author, Brian Sexton, of this piece, that, hey, here's the thing, dude, is that you see that over the last 100 years, there's been 3 major federal, more like 4, really 5 major federal legislative bills that have passed that have restricted gun rights, right? And it used to be something that was more talked about behind closed doors, and now it's talked about very openly. Things like ammunition taxes and licenses required for purchasing ammunition affect even people like you, Brian Sexton, the hunters, the recreational shooters, because you're going to pay for that as well. All right. And it's clear that, hey, if they're willing to go this far to take certain whole classes of firearms away from us, then who's to say that it's not going to come and knock on your door before long? All right. Where some of the guns that you own, Brian, as a more, I don't know, laid back gun owner, who's to say that they're not going to come for some of the stuff you own? Right. And everything is going to get more expensive. Ammunition, even the cost of guns is going to go up, as is going to be talked about in an upcoming story here in just a moment. Unless you have anything else to add, Jacob, you want to move on to the next story?
Oh, just that extremism is not just an issue in gun right world. It's an issue,
Right.
generally speaking, in our culture, and the inability to find common ground and compromise and find out what we agree on. That's a broad issue. It certainly is prevalent in gun rights discussions, but it's not unique to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And where we can, I think as gun owning Americans, we should do everything we can to try to work together, because we're far stronger all together than we are dividing up amongst ourselves. Next story, the Washington Free Beacon, freebeacon.com, has a story called Disgruntled NRA Donors Push to Oust LaPierre. Class action plaintiff David Dell'Aquila says he will ask for a bankruptcy trustee to run the gun group. This is a really interesting play with regards to the NRA. Jacob, do you want to walk us through this at all?
Well, I wish I was a lawyer so I understood it better, but I think that the like thing you need to understand in order to follow the story is that apparently, if I got this right, because the NRA has recently filed bankruptcy, it is within the power of the bankruptcy court to, at least temporarily, while the bankruptcy proceedings are taking place, it is within the power of the court to remove company leadership and replace it with
with trustees,
with a trustee, with somebody appointed by the court to do stuff,
to oversee the running of that company and getting it back on track as part of the bankruptcy proceedings.
Yep, it is within the power of the court to do that. And so this lawsuit, or whatever the right word is basically NRA members saying, hey, we're requesting very proactively that the court do that the court appoint somebody to run this business right now while it's in bankruptcy. And this may be a way to expose issues or whatever, things, so that we can get to the bottom of things that we think might be happening and disrupt the leadership that's been sitting there for so long.
Yeah, this, like I said, this is a really interesting play. So Mr. Dell'Aquila has been in the news before, really coming after the NRA, even suing the NRA in the past, and some of that has gone nowhere. His previous actions, he's really tried to build a coalition of fellow NRA members, and particularly those that have some influence, to try to effect change in the leadership at the NRA and the way the NRA has been run in recent years. And to that point, yes, I acknowledge and I recognize many faults within the organization and the leadership of the NRA. And I've talked before on the podcast about changes being made there, and I would support those changes, provided they move in the right direction and not make things worse. That's always somewhat difficult to determine, what is actually going to be better or not. But one thing I can tell you is that it's well recognized, at least in the circles I run in, that Wayne LaPierre is not favored anymore. Okay, that we'd like to see that position changed, and others, but especially, he's a big driver and he's the face of the organization, and it's so difficult in an organization like the NRA to change leadership, and I believe that was structured intentionally, because the way that it happens and the fact that the board of directors is a 76-person board is just insane. Okay. Like, on the one hand, you'd think you'd get good representation. On the other hand, it makes getting a coalition of board of directors together on things so that we can actually move the organization in positive directions. It sort of sets the stage for ensuring the status quo remains the status quo for a long time. And clearly the status quo is not working and hasn't been working, because the NRA is in trouble financially. The NRA is in trouble in terms of its public image, not only in the anti-gun or the general public, but even within the pro-gun and NRA member public. So there's a lot of problems. And I think this is a really interesting legal maneuver as David Della Aquila is pushing the court to establish a trustee to oversee the resolution of these bankruptcy proceedings, which, as it notes in the article, would mean removing folks like Wayne LaPierre and some of the other top leadership in the NRA. So hopefully that would be done. Again, hopefully that would be a positive thing, right? And it's important that the NRA discharges of debts and gets itself back on track and moves itself the heck out of New York City to somewhere more favorable. But the other big thing that I've noticed here, Jacob, is that David Della Aquila has been listed as one of the creditors in this bankruptcy. And that's significant, actually, because it gives him... Yeah, it gives him very definitive standing in these court proceedings. So
Sure.
That's more than what has been accomplished in the past, where he's sued and essentially courts have typically been like, well, you don't have grounds here, or things have been just tossed out. So this is an interesting play, because the creditors do play a role especially in large bankruptcies like this, because it's all about resolving things with creditors. Well, here he's been listed as a creditor, and that gives him a little bit more influence in how this proceeds.
Yeah, I don't know anyone personally. Like I've not had a conversation with a human in the last 3 years who feels like Wayne LaPierre should not be ousted. Like he should definitely stay in power. So I think the only person who feels that way is Wayne.
Yep. And his cronies, which there are a number of them.
Sure.
Yep. But then I say everything I said as a NRA life member, so that it's clear. Like, I have skin in this game. All right. I'm a voting life member. AMMOland.com reports new push for microstamping. Proponents claim technology has arrived. Jacob, what do we got going on here?
So the concept of microstamping is this idea that a firing pin in a gun is individual, that it is unique, and that when it strikes the primer on the back of the shell casing, on the back of the round, that it stamps that primer cup, the shell casing, in a way that's also unique, that allows law enforcement or whoever else, I suppose, possesses the technology and database to pick up that shell casing, look at the unique way it's been impacted, and then use that to reference the gun it came from. And so this is something that's been spoken about for some time, and it was thought that maybe the tech wasn't there yet, and now people are saying, no, the tech is there. We just need to mandate this. So let's talk about the objective. If you are a proponent of microstamping, then the objective on the surface level, like we could go deeper, right? But the very surface level objective is conceptually the idea that we want to be able to always know what gun fired something, to always be able to trace a gun, and specifically, hopefully, thinking about criminal situations, right? We're on a crime scene, we're picking up an empty shell casing, and we're saying, what gun did this come from? Whereas today, that's relatively challenging, especially if you don't possess the original gun. It's really hard to do any testing to verify that a specific shell casing, a specific round was fired from a specific gun. But this would perhaps give the opportunity to trace back to the actual gun that was used in the crime. Mm-hmm. Now, a couple of thoughts, though. This inherently requires that there be a database of guns, right? Yep. I mean, that it's conceptually required, which means you have to change U.S. federal law. The Firearm Owner Protection Act makes that illegal for there to be a list of firearms and people who own them. Like, that's not an option. So that's complicated to some degree, I think. I suppose you don't technically have to change that law. They could just have a database they could match like a serial number to a firing pin thing. to a microstamp, but that still doesn't bring them to an owner unless they have some sort of registration. And so it seems like it's one step away from firearm registration, because otherwise it's pretty pointless, worthless thing. Like, what good does microstamping do you at all if you don't have a database of the guns and their owners who have them? So I think that's the obvious, like, second step here. That's the slippery slope requirement in order for this to be functional. But the big concern is, in my mind, having read this article, it's completely untested. Like, they say the technology's arrived, and I said, a gun has never been sold in America ever with a microstamping capable firing pin. It doesn't exist. So your conceptual whatever is irrelevant because there's no proof of concept.
Yeah, and actually, Mark on Facebook here comments that a fair point. There is a federal law that prevents a federal database from being established currently under the FOPA, but there are states that have gun registration, and certainly it's within the realm of possibilities that that's the way that we get to gun registration on a wider national scale, as more and more states implementing things like that.
That's going to be pretty wrought with lawsuits, because the way the law is written in FOPA, it prevents the creation of a database by any jurisdiction. So states that currently have the registration system, they're effectively grandfathered in. They already were doing it before 1986, right? That's a short list. We're talking Hawaii, Massachusetts, Maryland, California, New York City. I think that's the list. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's it. So we're talking about like 5 jurisdictions or less who all were doing it prior to 1986. So no jurisdiction to date, since the law has passed, has dared to create such a registration system. And if they did, they probably lose that lawsuit, because the law is pretty clear that's the creation of such that is a no-go. So I want to be clear of that.
We have in our own state here, in your backyard, practically, the city.
This is a marijuana conversation.
Right? That has established a registration of AR-15's.
Well, that's complicated. To suggest it's a registration, what I would say is complicated. What you could do is you get a certificate to show you owned it before a law went into effect. But those certificates, I had to go check. I don't know if they're taking serial numbers or not. But I think that to me, marijuana is the more like apt comparison issue here, right? If you have a large number of states in this country, including ours, where you and I reside, ignoring federal law and doing what they want, then there's a precedent there for other instances of ignoring the federal law. We just haven't seen any state attempt to do it yet relative to firearm registration.
Although I promise you, there are those that would like to, right? So
yeah, and we have a House bill right now that's been written and drafted proposing to get rid of that article in the Firearm Owner Protection Act and to establish a licensing and registration system. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Yep. The microstamping thing. So you already covered it pretty well, and we know that it's there's a lot of problems associated with requiring microstamping. One of the things that comes first to mind for me, Jacob, is obviously the cost. And it even talks about in this article, but the NSSF had a report estimating that requiring microstamping would increase the cost of a firearm by $200 per firearm. I don't know how reasonable it is, but it's probably not far off, right?
No, it sounds very
about you got to manufacture a firing pin that then, through the use of some kind of micro manufacturing technique, you're able to cut into or form the shape of these unique serial numbers on the tip of that firing pin. That sounds like a very expensive thing. Like, I'm sure it can be done technologically wise, right? That's what this article is talking about, is that the technology is here, that it has arrived. Doesn't mean it's going to be inexpensive, right? And even
just the changing the tolerances of manufacturing. Right now, there's a relative amount of wiggle room relative to the way you make a firing pin and ensure that it's going to work with all the different types of ammo. This would really tighten those tolerances to a degree that a lot of guns probably today would not work. They'd have to be re-engineered.
That's true. I think so as well. And also, I mean, just getting down to firing pins are a part of the firearm that eventually has to be replaced.
and anyone could manufacture with very limited knowledge and tools.
Yes. Yeah.
So
And so, but if citizens want to be law abiding, right, and they think, well, my firing pin is now broken or it's worn out, so I need to replace it. So they want to go the correct route of going to the manufacturer and getting a new one, a duplicate or whatever made. Like that sounds like a massive sourcing and logistics issue, a huge challenge, right? That would result in huge backlogs of just trying to get certain critical parts because they got to be manufactured, at a very high cost. So that's a challenge. The cost of the firearm itself going up, it just further hurts those that are already more disadvantaged in our society, those that are poor, those that which targets minorities at a much higher rate.
people who
Right?
need the guns more than anybody else, probably.
Arguably, yes, absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's just fraught with all kinds of issues, and
But
but
the
you
real
know this is
issue,
what they want to push for.
the real issue is that it doesn't actually achieve anything, right?
Yep.
Because loyal listeners of the podcast know that I am not opposed to gun regulation. It just has to pass some criteria. And my criteria is that the benefits have to outweigh the downside. And in this case, it just doesn't pass. And by the way, almost zero gun control legislation being proposed has ever passed my criteria since I've been paying attention. But this definitely doesn't pass because there's just no benefit. That's the problem. Is like if this would reduce violent crime in some dramatic way, we'd be all about it. We'd be like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, like let's figure out how to do it at scale and a good cost. But it's not going to have any positive effect whatsoever on anything. So I don't know why any of us care. Like it just I don't. That's the problem. Is that the benefit that they purport that will exist is foolish and ridiculous.
Shall not be infringed, Jacob.
Hey, I'm all for reasonable regulation that does not reduce my rights more than is necessary to achieve a dramatic reduction in violent crime. I really am open to it, guys. Like I know that there's hate mail coming on that one, but the problem is that we keep seeing proposals that do not reduce violent crime and do overly restrict my rights. And so I can't put my stamp of approval on anything. But I am conceptually, theoretically open to something that would restrict my gun rights if the benefit outweighed the downside, right? If it would dramatically decrease violent crime, I'm open to the conversation. But this won't.
No, it won't. Absolutely won't. Okay, moving on to MLN.com, also reporting modern sporting rifles as bear stoppers. They worked in every recorded incident thus far. Another really interesting piece from Dean Weingarten. We've covered some of his work in the past, particularly as relates to use of guns in defense against bears. We've talked a couple of times actually about some of his studies, if you will, of handguns, common handguns, and of a variety of calibers being used successfully and pretty overwhelmingly successfully, frankly, against bear attacks. We're talking your standard calibers. There was even some instances of 22s being used successfully, 38 special, 380 auto, 9mm, 40, 45, 357 Magnum were all examples that Dean covered in some of his previous articles. And I'm not saying, by the way, that it's a good idea to pack around a 22 long rifle. And I seem to recall it was like 3 out of 5 instances in that case, or something like that. There was definitely some failures, but anyway. So now he's highlighting in this article modern sporting rifles or modern semi-automatic typically AR style or AK style sporting rifles. So by this, these typically are rifles of a caliber that is generally not used or considered to be adequate for the use of hunting of large game animals. But what's curious is what we're looking at with this is there a place for them in terms of defense against dangerous large animal attacks? And granted, it's only a sample size of 4 but it is pretty interesting. So he goes over 4 different incidents, one of them involving a polar bear. And I don't know how many of you know much about, say, the different types of bears and kind of like their size and what they're capable of, but polar bears are huge. Grizzly bears are also huge, but polar bears are bigger than grizzly bears typically. Black bears, they're the little puppies of of bear world. Like they're small typically compared to especially animals like polar bears. But regardless, bears are bears, and they do occasionally pose a legitimate threat to us humans. So in 2008, a polar bear in Alaska was stopped with a 223 AR. It's actually an interesting story because the gentleman talks about how he had to shoot from the hip because that's how fast this attack happened. Then the bear stopped about 10 feet away from him. He said he just didn't. If he had tried to get the gun up to his shoulder, there wouldn't have been time to get the hits he needed to on that bear to stop it. I might debate a little bit about that. I think that if you're really skilled, that shooting from the hip versus just getting up to the shoulder is probably not that big a difference as far as getting that mounted in the shoulder and using your sights. But fact is, the man got the job done, and he got it done, meaning stopped a polar bear with 7 or 8 shots from his AR style rifle. Pretty impressive. In 2013, an Alaskan hunter stopped a grizzly with an AK-74. An AK-74 is the little brother of the AK-47, meaning it shoots essentially what is a 22 caliber round, 5.45 millimeter, slightly smaller in diameter than a 223. He stopped with 13 shots this grizzly bear attack in Alaska. And then 2 more incidents involving black bears, where one was an AR-15, a man using it to stop a bear who was posing a threat to his dog. And another incident in Nevada, just south of Reno. And this was just last year in June of 2020. Another AR-15, although in this case chambered in 6.8 SPC, but he stopped a large black bear that was charging towards him. So pretty interesting. Just more interesting, I guess, data points. Looking at guns that are more typically associated with personal defense use against humans, but expanding that perspective to the use against deadly critters as well. So by this, I mean Dean's fantastic work studying handgun use against bears as well as modern sporting rifles.
Yeah, Dean's got this thing with bears. So, yeah, I don't have a lot to add except that I think that rate of fire on a semi-automatic is a significant contributing factor. He doesn't give any data here about how many shots on average or anything like that. And also, it's still a pretty small sample size, right? I think we're looking like 4 incidents that he has access to, that he can find, that he has been able to research, which are a carbine, a modern sporting rifle, or whatever the heck we call it. It has been used against a bear. So all very good and interesting. I think velocity and rate of fire are pretty significant contributing factors. But yeah, cool.
I mean, it comes down to all that matters in terms of affecting a stoppage against a living creature is a projectile, an object that penetrates deeply enough to disrupt critical organs and essentially the flow of blood, right? Like you do that, you're going to get a stop, or taking out the central nervous system, of course. 223 certainly has the potential of penetrating enough, depending on what the rounds are that are being used. But there's always variables. Certainly has the capability, just as we've talked about Dean's previous articles with things like 38 specials and 9 millimeters. Guns that people don't normally look at and go, yeah, that'll get the job done against a bear. Hey, if you place the shots appropriately and those rounds can penetrate deeply enough into the meaty tissues of that bear and get to where the heart is or where the brain is, then that's all you need. All right. It certainly has changed my perspective a little bit. I used to probably make more of a effort, Jacob, to take larger caliber guns with me into the backcountry, and I still do that occasionally, but I don't. But there's also times too where I just take a 9mm, and I know I got 16 rounds in the gun, and I got a 21, backup magazine, 21 round backup mag. You know what? I can put a lot of rounds on an animal very quickly. So
You also make a lot of noise, which tends to be pretty effective.
Yeah, exactly. That could be too. Turning now to guns.com, reporting that Sig Sauer has recently completed delivery of the next generation infantry squad weapons to the U.S. Army. So the Army has been working on this procurement of, and things have been worked on many times before. The idea being that we're still using an M16 M4 based platform in the U.S. military. It dates back to the 60s. And so the idea is that, hey, you know what? It's time to phase that out and bring in the next generation. They keep going back to the M4, the current number one platform in use by the U.S. military, because you know what? It works. And when they start weighing all the factors, you talked about cost benefit analysis, Jacob, about legislation. They have to take into account, well, yeah, we might want a larger caliber round, for instance, but then there's all these other things that have to change because of that, and also downsides, including, well, we can't carry as much ammunition with us, because now that ammunition weighs more and things of that nature. Some really interesting solutions being proposed by 3 companies that are still in the running for this, what could be a very large contract that is expected to be, and I don't know if this is still on track because of COVID and everything, but expected in 2022 that they may be finalizing this procurement. And what it is basically looking at a new carbine-sized rifle platform for U.S. troops, but also a light machine gun. All right, kind of the idea being the intent being to replace the M249, the M249 and the M16 M4 being chambered in 223, and these new guns are going to be in a 6.8 millimeter chambering. All right, SIG has devised a whole new round of their own, 6.8 millimeter round, uses a hybrid case that allows them to get some weight savings in that round, but also allow it to have very high pressures and very high velocity to maximize its effectiveness in terms of performance, terminal and external ballistic performance. So the new 6.8 by 51 SIG hybrid ammunition looks pretty interesting, pretty promising. This is kind of where the 277 Fury round, that's a civilian equivalent of this, sort of where that's come from, and which is a very impressive round, ballistically speaking. So we're talking about going to a little bit bigger caliber and a different platform of guns, rifles, that still function very similarly, right? That's one big thing they don't want to change. They don't want to change the standard, manual of operations, if you will, of what our U.S. military men and women are used to, right? So basically, we've standardized the location of that safety selector. We've standardized the location of the mag release, and on these new guns, these will be ambidextrous as well. So mag release both sides. You're able to operate the bolt and everything, ambidextrously, safety selector, all that. So anyway, point is, SIG has delivered their submission of prototypes essentially to the U.S. Army that now will be used in the final phases of testing and evaluation to then determine, is it going to be SIG? Is it going to be, I think, Textron or something is the other company? And then General Dynamics, I think, is the other one that's involved.
Yeah, I don't have much to add except that 6 Sauer is building on some momentum with their previous military contract, and that they do have an advantage in that they can bid on and complete an RFP, not only with a firearm, but also with their own ammunition, that they are a significant high resource manufacturer of ammunition, gives them a leg up.
Yeah, their submission, by the way, is, I mean, and that this is truly what is unique about SIG in this regard, is not only the rifle and ammunition, but also optics. They're able to deliver and provide optics and suppressors. And so I believe new suppressors is a part of this procurement as well. So pretty interesting, that SIG is able to completely do this on their own. And meanwhile, the other companies involved in this procurement process are partnerships, that are, companies that are joining together, like Winchester is working together with some of these other companies to provide the ammunition and so on and so forth. So anyway, pretty a unique position that SIG has put themselves in, but that's something they've worked themselves towards. They've been working on it for a good number of years now to be, remember their tagline a few years back was complete systems provider, implying that they could make everything that you would need for a weapons system. And they truly do. On another article from guns.com. Oh, wait, hang on. Nope. I got an extra thing in there. Okay. So that brings us, we were just talking about Sig Sauer. We're going to talk some more about Sig Sauer. Jacob, why don't you give us an overview of this issue in Canada, the Canadian Special Forces and their issued P320s being withdrawn?
All right. So there's some drama a little while ago. I don't remember the dates or the timelines. This is pretty recent, in the last month or two, where a member of the Canada's Special Operations Force Command, has a misfire with the P320, and here's the quote from the Canadian Special Forces people. They said, one member sustained a minor gunshot injury during the incident, was treated and released the same day, and was returned to duty. Immediate actions were followed, including quarantining the weapon and the ammunition in accordance with Canadian Armed Forces standard operating procedures. Investigation is ongoing to determine the cause of the incident. So naturally, when something like this happens, it's going to create a bunch of a media storm, right? So people are freaking out like, oh my gosh, is this gun safe or not? And it doesn't help Sig Sauer's case, right? It doesn't help the media situation, the PR of the thing, when several years ago in 2017, there was a voluntary upgrade issued for the P320s. That there was they wouldn't use the word issue, right? That there was a potential less than optimal thing going on with the P320s, and so they changed the way they were manufacturing them and gave existing owners of that firearm the opportunity to get a voluntary upgrade to the trigger, because it was conceivable, if dropped at the right angle with the right amount of force, that it could discharge without someone physically pressing the trigger to the rear. So it would be natural, right, that if you hear that some special forces operator dude has had a misfire with this particular gun, that you would jump to that conclusion that either he's not operating the newest and greatest version, and or that the issues are not resolved, right, that the drama continues on. But it turns out, even though the Canadian Special Forces, they don't want to give us any details, we got the ongoing investigation drama. Sig Sauer did issue a statement, and I think it's pretty specific and comprehensive. And should I read it, Riley?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. So here's what Sig Sauer says. Sig Sauer is working with Canadian Special Operations Forces Command to resolve an incident involving the unintended discharge of a P320. An inaccurate and incomplete report of this incident was recently published in the Canadian media that called into question the safety of the P320. While this incident occurred months ago, this erroneous media report is driven by multiple sources, including our competitors, name calling, and coincides with the imminent release of other Canadian military and law enforcement tenders, indicating the timing of its release is an attempt to improperly influence the procurements. The firearm involved has been extensively tested by Sig Sauer, and it has been determined to be safe. The investigation revealed, this is the key, the use of an incorrect holster not designed for a P320. The use of a modified P226 holster created an unsafe condition by allowing a foreign object to enter the holster, causing the unintended discharge. The 6-hour P320 is among the most rigorously vetted pistols in the market. The P20, and then we just go on to talk about how it's great and awesome and tested and meets all the standards. So I think there's two takeaways here. One is 6 hours basically calling out the media who's propagating or pushing forward the rumors that are not based on evidence and fact, and they're straight up saying that some of their competitors are at least to some degree involved in the slander. And they're very specifically saying, well, if you use our gun with the wrong holster, you might have that kind of an issue. And since the Canadian Special Forces, when they switched the P320, they were switching from the P226. And so at least one of them, maybe this is more widespread, at least one of them, instead of getting a new holster, just modified their 226 holster to accommodate the P320. And that was done in a way that was unsafe and left the trigger guard to some degree exposed, such that a foreign object could enter the trigger guard and, in the reholstering of the gun, cause the trigger to be depressed.
Yep. I've had this very conversation with a couple of people over the last few weeks since this revealed itself. A lot of people bagging on Sig Sauer and saying, and basically dragging up this, the old story of, well, they've had a problem. They've always had a problem. They continue to have a problem. And I said, I can only see this being a couple of things. Number one, they somehow still had guns that were unupgraded. They were not upgraded yet, meaning these were guns that did not have the latest, greatest, trigger installed in them. Right. But I thought that was probably unlikely, especially for a major, this is the Canadian Special Operations, the Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, right? Like how would they have 400 SIG pistols that aren't up to snuff in terms of they're not up to the current spec? So that seemed a little odd. The other thing was somebody's trying to cover for themselves. They made a mistake, and it was just, the gun and the manufacturer just an easy scapegoat to say, because of problems that have been in the past. Well, it must have been the gun, right? And in this case, it's kind of that, really. Frankly, it's a bit negligent if they're using modified P226 holsters to try to fit their P320 pistols in. Like, really? What? Like, that's never a good idea to try to use holsters that are designed for other guns, even though the 226 and the 320 might be similar. They're not, by the way. I know that for a fact, but they are kind of similar. It really depends on what the holster is.
They're about as similar as a Glock and a P320. If we're talking similar, like they're both semi-automatic handguns.
Proportionally, like slide to frame and all that is kind of close, and the width, but there's a lot of distinct differences even then. So, and I said something to this effect, I think maybe even to our internal team, like it could have been something holster related. And hey, if you have an improper holster, it's conceivable that something makes its way through the opening at holster and gets a hold of that trigger. It kind of sounds like something like that is what happened here. So
yeah, there's a good lesson there for us non-Canadian Special Forces Operation Command people. That we should be using good gear that's designed for the gun, but also that even sometimes with optimal gear, we've seen incidents happen like this because the user wasn't paying attention when they reholstered the gun, because the jacket or the pull string or the shirt or the whatever got caught in the whatever. It's just a good, healthy reminder to all of us that let's use appropriate equipment, but let's also be cautious, specifically when reholstering. That tends to be a commonality we see in these incidents.
Yep, exactly right. Now, granted, it's expected that SIG would provide a statement that is worded in such a way to benefit them as much as possible, right? But to me, it sounds like it's pretty reasonable what the explanation that has been provided. And I'll say this much. Being very, very intimately familiar with the P320 platform, as it is the gun that I carry and shoot the most of. It's one that I have torn down completely to an armor's level numerous times. I'm familiar with the new Wish now upgrade trigger system and how that operates. And I'll just say this much: I cannot conceive how a gun in a proper holster, a P320 in a proper holster, would just suddenly and magically discharge itself. There's like, you have a better chance of winning the Powerball. Like, and I'm dead serious about that. There's so many
When
things that have to go wrong at the exact same moment for that gun to discharge itself without something or somebody pushing the trigger. So,
yeah, and I think that that's the takeaway, right? As modern gun owners, the takeaway is guns are the standard I hold a gun to is that the trigger doesn't depress unless an object presses it. Right. And so, and that's pretty much what industry standard testing is meant to confirm. Though obviously we've seen some exceptions where extreme whatever testing environments has caused that not to be the case. But if the trigger doesn't depress without an object pushing it backwards, then it really becomes it's left to me. I become the safety, right? The gun is made to specs, and now I have to manage the gun in a way that prevents anything from pushing the trigger to the rear when I don't want it getting pushed to the rear. So anyway, I just think it's a good reminder that even if he'd been using a holster designed for the P320, this incident probably could still have happened if you get the wrong object in the wrong spot at the wrong time when you're shoving that gun back into the holster.
yes, which is a essentially a user error type sort of thing. Like, it's incumbent upon us to verify the condition of our equipment, the condition of our firearm, the condition of our holster, and make sure that things are still compatible when we are putting the gun in holster. Awesome. That's a wrap of our stories. We are probably a little bit over time, but Jacob, why don't you give us your gear review? So here we are on to our gear reviews portion of the show. And I'll just point out that Matthew and I will do the weekly podcast prize giveaway in today's later episode. So, Matthew, what's your gear review today?
I'm Jacob.
Oh, sorry, Jacob. I was talking about Matthew later, but yes.
So today, my gear review is the Ready Up Gear 16340 USB rechargeable batteries.
Yeah.
Anyone who's got a high performance flashlight is used to the idea that they have to buy expensive batteries. It's kind of a crappy part of life. But in order to get really bright lights, you have to put a lot of electric current and flow into said light bulb. And in order to put lots of electric flow into said light bulb, you have to use a battery that's expensive. So traditionally, most of us are used to using CR123A batteries or 18650 batteries. They're just kind of the standard battery for most flashlights, because the CR123A puts out 3 volts from a single battery, which is double that of like a AA or a AAA, right? Those are 1.5 volts. And so they're very common, especially in smaller tactical flashlights, CR123A batteries. But CR123A batteries are not cheap. In fact, I just did a quick Google search, and like if you're going and buying just like a 2-pack from Energizers or Duracells, you're probably paying a little more than $2 a battery. That gives you some context. I'm sure you can do better than that if you go on Amazon and buy the Amazon brand and get 50 of them at a time. But they're not cheap batteries.
The deal, okay, Amazon, a dozen Surefire batteries, which are great. $1 or $1.50 or something each. It's about the best deal you can find, frankly, for a quality CR123.
Yeah, so there you go. So the Surefire, I thought it was a 10-pack on Amazon. But anyway, the point is they're not cheap batteries. Even when you get a really good deal on a quality battery, you're still paying more than $1 a pop, probably at least $1.50 a pop. And it just, I know $1.50 is not a lot, Riley, but it sucks. It's like, man, AA's and AAA's, which are so prevalent in our world, are so cheap. And so every time you have to replace those dang CR123As, it's like, this blows. But so anyway, I'm a big fan of the 16340. The 16340 is the number vernacular used to describe a battery that is the same size and similar to and is a replacement for a CR123A, but it's rechargeable. So 16340 is just, who knows, the battery gods decided that's what we were going to call them. But this particular 16340 from Ready Up Gear is USB rechargeable. And so it has a micro USB charging port on the battery itself. So I just plug it in, and it has a little indicator light. It's red when it's charging, and it's blue when it's done being charged, and good to go. I stick it in the flashlight, and I'm set. And they're sold in 2 packs, which I think is important, because I think, you can charge one while the other one's in use, and you swap it out every couple of days or whatever, and you're good. Now, the other advantage of a 16340, by the way, is this 16340s put out 3.7 volts. So not only are you getting something that's rechargeable, you're not spending a crap ton of money on it, but also advantageously, you also get higher output. So you're getting a brighter light. So if you check most flashlight specs, you'll see, if you're using it with the CR123A, this is the lumens. If you use it with the 16340, this is the lumens. That's always a higher number. You're getting a brighter light when you use it with the 16340 because it's more voltage output, 3.7 volts instead of 3 volts. So I'm a big fan of the Ready Up Gear batteries. Now, all that is what I knew. And then the other day, you and I were chatting, and you said, and I won't name names, but you told me that you had been using a competing product, a rechargeable 16340 battery from a different company whose name I won't name. And you were surprised how few cycles you got from it before you had to discharge it and replace it. And now, over the last couple of months, you've been using the Ready Up Gear ones, and you say that they've yet to fail you. You've yet to have to replace them. You're getting tons of recharge cycles from them. And I thought, you would use yours way more than I do. So I just thought that was another testament to the product, and I'm feeling really warm and fuzzy with the 16340s. That said, and I'm seeing a comment here from someone on YouTube, and it is worth saying this out loud, that you should confirm that the flashlight you're using will allow that you replace your CR123A with the 16340. Obviously, it does have a higher voltage output, so not all flashlights are going to allow you to replace or substitute the CR123A with the 16340, but most do. I don't. All of mine that I've checked allow for it and give me more lumens, more brightness. So, ReadyUpGear.com, the 16340 2-pack of USB rechargeables. I'm a fan.
Yeah. I held up there for the camera a moment ago, and I was covering up the name of the brand of the competing product. And I've bought several of these over the years, have used them, and I have 3 dead ones sitting on my desk right now. I have sent them back and on a warranty exchange twice, and they keep dying. All right. And by that they stop recharging. That's the failure. So I'm sure the battery cell itself will continue to provide many cycles of use, but something in the circuitry of the recharging circuit breaks, and they just stop being able to be recharged. And so, yeah, I'll just say as much. It's not like I have hundreds and hundreds of cycles of our Ready Up Gear 16340 batteries, but I have enough cycles on them to compare them with competing brands product that has failed in some cases in as soon as about 10 cycles. So anyway, all right, here's my product I'm reviewing today, and I'm pretty excited about this product, partly because I had to wait some number of months to get it, but now that they arrived, and I believe they have them in stock, or they are taking more pre-orders, but they are getting them restocked much more quickly than the first version. And what that is the Press Check assault gloves from SKD Tactical. These are also they are a version of the Pig. What is it? Pig Full Dexterity Tactical Glove, I think is what they're called. But these are branded and designed with input from Chuck Pressburg, a friend of mine who was in the unit, Delta Force. And he's a man that doesn't like gloves, but has been in situations where he's had to wear gloves. And so basically these are gloves designed to be, if you hate gloves, but you got to wear gloves, these might be acceptable to use. The idea is that they're extremely flexible. They allow for excellent dexterity in the hands and the fingers. That is absolutely true. I have done some dry fire this week with these on, and coming from another brand, another type of glove in the past that I was a huge fan of, but they were discontinued. And I just never found another glove that I liked as well as that older style and brand that I used. These are exceptional. In fact, I think they're better than my previous favorite gloves. As far as like they are great. They have, again, great dexterity, articulation where they need it, little details that I think really matter. One big thing I've complained about with other types of gloves is the gloves that have the the strap that you use to actually close and secure them or tighten them down around the wrist. I hate gloves for shooting purposes where that wrist portion of the glove extends further down, and then you wrap this Velcro thing and you close it tight, and it actually affected articulation of the wrist, which can be critical when you're shooting a gun, right? With a pistol, also with a carbine rifle, you might be in some shooting positions even where the articulation is such of your wrist and your hand that extra material and that clasp, if you will, that securing Velcro would actually impede on my articulation of the wrist. And it's just, I mean, you could get it done, but it was uncomfortable. It created tightness where it didn't need to be. These are only as long as they need to be. They cover the hand. They don't extend beyond the wrist. So my wrist is exposed to where it is able to fully articulate. They're not intended to be cold weather gloves. These are just a standard glove. They're obviously going to take the bite off of cooler temperatures, but they seem well made. The seams look well stitched. They've got extra material where they need it. They got this sticky material in the palm for extra grip where you really want it in the palm. And again, the trigger finger is just nicely articulated, and it's not overly large. So again, I've done some dry fire work this week to the tune of probably 200 or so practice draws, all with gloves and also reloads. So grab and spare mags and all that with gloves. And my manipulations are fantastic, even with these on. So I would say that my par times in dry fire with draws and with reloads are maybe 0.1 or 0.2 seconds slower. And that's actually pretty well on the draw, probably less so. And that's pretty significant for me. So the ability to still function at a high level, even while you're wearing gloves that tend to kind of get in the way and slow things down a little bit, it's pretty cool. So the Press Check Assault gloves from SKD Tactical, and also I think it's 30% of the proceeds from the sales of these go to a nonprofit organization called Warrior's Heart, which is an organization to help people overcome substance abuse. And they do fantastic work. I did a little bit of research on them, and they're awesome. So I had to pre-order those things like last August or September. No, probably about July or August. And they finally showed up. This was their first batch. And now it sounds like they're going to have a lot more, on the way and go, kind of keep that flow moving. And they're selling very quickly. So very excited about these new gloves.
Well, I'm disappointed you got the right size, because my last pair of new shooting gloves came when you bought the wrong size gloves and you had to give them to me.
Yeah. Well, that's always a concern. I did follow the sizing chart on the SKD Tactical's website, and fortunately it worked well. I would say, so here's my challenge. I have kind of fat palms but short fingers. And so that creates a unique glove size challenge, because a lot of times they have you measure the length from like your wrist to your tip of your middle finger, and then they'll have you weigh or measure the width of your palm or the circumference of your palm. And so I did that, and so I got what I expected, and that is that the length of my hand to the tip of my finger it would lend you to think I need a smaller size. But the circumference of my palm indicates the next size up. I kind of am in between a large and an extra large. And I was a little nervous going with the large, but based on what I could see from the sizing chart, seemed like I should go with the large. And I'm glad I did. I think the extra large probably would have been good in the palm area, but I would have had extra material in the length of the fingers, and that would have hindered me in my dexterity.
That's SDK?
SKD.
Okay.
Sierra Kilo Delta Tactical.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So there you go. That's my review. And that brings us to the end of another fine episode. Jacob, thanks for being a part of this one with me. And so, guys, we were going to let you go. And a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.